It started with a video. 12 seconds. That's all it took to rip open a wound the world thought had healed. The screen lit up with Meghan Markle's familiar face, poised, flawless, glowing beneath the Paris streetlights. Her phone camera caught the shimmer of the city as her car rolled past the Seine, golden reflections dancing across the window. To her millions of followers, it was just another glamorous post from a global celebrity. But to those who recognized the road she was on, it was something else entirely. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Because that road, that bridge, that tunnel, was the Pont de l'Alma, the same tunnel where Diana, Princess of Wales, took her last breath in 1997. Now imagine being Prince William, scrolling through your feed, seeing that clip, the same shadows, the same angles, the same eerie descent. What would you feel? Shock? Rage? Heartbreak? The internet exploded before the video even hit 1 million views. Some said it was artistic. Others called it insensitive, haunting, tone-deaf. But within the walls of Kensington Palace, the reaction was far stronger. Because for the future King of England, this wasn't about aesthetics. It was about his mother's memory being turned into content, and he wasn't having it. But let's back up for a moment. Why was Meghan even in Paris? And why did this simple video cause such an uproar across the world, from royal insiders to fashion critics to average people scrolling TikTok at midnight? To understand that, you have to see the timing. Paris Fashion Week. Balenciaga's star-studded runway. A weekend of spectacle, fame, and redemption, or at least, that's what Meghan wanted it to be. For months, the Duchess of Sussex had been carefully crafting her return to global relevance. After a string of lukewarm projects, from her Spotify deal collapse to the lukewarm response to archetypes, Meghan's Paris appearance was meant to mark a new chapter, a reinvention, a statement that she wasn't just surviving post-royal life, she was thriving. The cameras loved her. The crowd murmured. Vogue photographers angled for the shot. Meghan had returned to the fashion elite's inner circle, dressed in black Balenciaga with diamond drop earrings, flashing that trademark smile that always seemed to say, "I'm unbothered." But the internet doesn't forget, and neither does the crown. When her video surfaced just hours later, showing her car gliding through the Pont de l'Alma tunnel, it was more than just a poor choice. It felt deliberate, provocative, almost cinematic. The camera lingered on the city lights. The blurred shot of her stiletto heel resting on the leather seat. The faint reflection of her own eyes in the window as she captioned it. Paris, your magic. But for millions of royal watchers, that magic was twisted. Because that tunnel wasn't just another Paris landmark. It was sacred ground, a place forever tied to loss, sorrow, and the relentless cruelty of fame. The backlash was immediate. Thousands of comments poured in. How could she? Is she mocking Diana? Unbelievable, the disrespect. And then came the silence from Buckingham Palace. For 2 days, no word, no statement, no denial, no attempt to clarify, until one leak changed everything. A royal insider told the Daily Mail, Prince William is appalled. He sees it as a mockery of his mother's memory. He believes some things are sacred, and Meghan crossed that line. And just like that, the internet went into overdrive. Headlines screamed about William's fury, a royal line drawn in the sand, and the palace finally pushing back. The brothers, already distant, suddenly seemed to be standing on opposite sides of Diana's ghost. But the truth ran deeper than a few tabloids could print. Because this wasn't just about one video. It was about years of tension. The invisible tug-of-war between legacy and modernity, between duty and defiance. Meghan had built her brand around challenging royal tradition, but this time, the challenge struck a nerve buried so deep it still bled decades later. Think about it. Diana's memory isn't just personal to William and Harry. It's foundational to how the public perceives the monarchy. Her death reshaped how the royals interact with the world. Her vulnerability, her charm, her humanity, all of it became a mirror for everything the institution wanted to hide. And now, to see that same tragedy referenced, even indirectly, by a woman who once married into that same family, it was too much. The irony was sharp. Meghan had once compared herself to Diana, the outsider, misunderstood, hunted by the press. She had invoked Diana's name in interviews, Netflix specials, even subtle wardrobe choices. But this was different. This wasn't homage. This was performance. Or at least, that's how William saw it. Inside Kensington Palace, sources claimed William was livid, pacing, clenching his jaw, struggling to contain emotions he rarely showed in public. For a man who spent his adult life mastering composure, this felt like betrayal. A personal attack, wrapped in social media gloss. Those close to him say he said something few expected to hear from the usually restrained prince. She turned Mum's tragedy into an aesthetic. Just imagine the weight of those words. Because William's entire life, from walking behind that coffin at age 15 to standing before crowds preaching about mental health, has been about protecting his mother's dignity. Every charity he supports, every speech he gives, every boundary he draws with the press, all trace back to that one night in Paris. And now, decades later, he finds himself watching that same city, that same tunnel, splashed across Instagram for likes. Do you see the sting? The generational irony? For William, Paris is a graveyard of memories. For Meghan, it's a fashion backdrop. Two completely different worlds colliding over one piece of pavement. And then, something even more interesting happened. Something the press barely covered at first. Harry didn't speak. No defense. No post. No clarification. Just silence. For a man who had publicly defended Meghan countless times, against headlines, against critics, against his own family, his silence was deafening. It raised questions. Was he quietly agreeing with William? Was this the first time he couldn't bring himself to justify Meghan's choices? The tension became the story. Insiders whispered about unseen fallout, about William refusing contact, about aides being told to stand down on any joint charity projects involving the Sussexes. For a brief moment, it felt like the royal rift had deepened into something irreparable, not just between brothers, but between the living and the dead. Because in many ways, Diana still stands between them. One son honors her memory through duty, the other through rebellion. And one woman, whether intentionally or not, stepped right into that divide. But here's the thing about Meghan Markle. She's not easily rattled. As criticism poured in, she didn't apologize. She didn't explain. She simply kept posting stylized photos, Parisian backdrops, cryptic captions about grace and misunderstanding. To her fans, it was confidence. To her critics, defiance. And somewhere, behind palace gates, William's frustration only grew. Those who know him say he's always been patient, methodical, even diplomatic when necessary. But this, they say, broke something in him. Because for William, this wasn't about image. It was about his mother. The one person he lost not to illness, not to betrayal, but to the flashing cameras of a world that couldn't look away. And now, another woman with cameras and fame was gliding through the same tunnel, smiling, filming, posting. Can you feel the ache behind that realization? Even for viewers thousands of miles away, there was something haunting about that parallel. The same kind of eerie déjà vu that made you stop scrolling and stare. The outrage wasn't just royal loyalists defending tradition. It was ordinary people remembering where they were in 1997. The tears, the flowers outside Kensington Palace, the feeling that something pure had been taken too soon. This wasn't just a scandal. It was a reminder. A wound reopened by a woman who may not have even realized what she was touching. Or did she? Because as the hours passed and the outrage grew, Meghan's camp went quiet. No clarifications. No retractions. Only that haunting video looping again and again, each time gaining more traction. Was it deliberate? A PR stunt to court controversy? Or just a careless mistake at the worst possible location? The answer might depend on who you ask. But for Prince William, the answer didn't matter, because intent couldn't erase impact. He had one message, one line drawn in stone. My mother's legacy is not for performance. And that's when it became clear, this wasn't just a social media moment. This was war. A silent war fought through press leaks, palace statements, and icy public appearances. A war between memory and ambition. Between respect and reinvention. And for the first time, it wasn't Meghan Markle versus the British press. It was Meghan Markle versus the son of Princess Diana. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Same tone, cinematic, emotional, dramatic exposé, with cliffhanger ending. The night was humid. Paris was alive, pulsing with light and noise, the kind of night that promised beauty but hid tragedy behind every corner. August 31st, 1997. A date carved into the collective memory of an entire generation. The Ritz Hotel. Flashes, screams, engines, and one woman, the most photographed woman in the world, stepping into a black Mercedes that would never see daylight again. That woman was Diana, the people's princess. And that tunnel, Pont de el Alma, was about to become her final chapter. You know the story, or at least you think you do. But every time someone mentions it, the air shifts. People remember where they were when the news broke. The disbelief, the tears, the silence that fell across London that morning. For William and Harry, it was more than history. It was the night their world shattered. Now fast forward nearly 3 decades later, to that same tunnel, the same route, the same echo of tires against the walls, and imagine seeing it again, this time through the lens of Meghan Markle's camera. Do you feel the chill? But before that connection became viral outrage, before the world accused Meghan of disrespect, that tunnel already carried ghosts. Let's step back into it, into that night, that sound, that flash, and remember why this place isn't just a landmark. It's sacred. Diana's last evening began with elegance, as it always did. She dined at the Ritz Paris with Dodi Fayed, the son of billionaire Mohammed Al Fayed. The paparazzi were relentless. They had followed her all summer, from the Mediterranean to the French capital, hoping for one final photograph, the money shot. A kiss, a ring, a secret. They didn't know what they were chasing. They just knew it was her. At 12:20 a.m., they left through the hotel's back entrance to escape the photographers. But fate, cruel as ever, had already chosen its stage. The driver, Henri Paul, sped away, trying to outrun the flashing lights that cut through the night. Diana sat in the back seat, wearing a soft blue dress, her heart beating fast as the car raced along the Seine. Then, the tunnel, the screech, the impact, silence. It was over in seconds. By the time the world woke up, it was already too late. The candle in the wind had been extinguished in the city of light. That was the night the monarchy changed forever. Diana wasn't just another royal. She was the soul of the institution. And her death exposed everything: the coldness of the crown, the hunger of the press, and the power of public love. It forced Queen Elizabeth to step out of tradition and face her people. It forced 2 boys, just children, to walk behind their mother's coffin before billions of eyes. Now imagine growing up with that image. Imagine being 15, walking in that procession, the echo of camera clicks following your every step. And imagine swearing silently to yourself that no one would ever exploit your mother's memory again. That vow became William's backbone. It shaped how he protected Kate, how he raised his children, how he handled fame. So when he saw Meghan's car driving through that same tunnel, the symbolism wasn't lost on him. It wasn't just an Instagram post. It was the return of something he'd spent decades trying to bury. Because to the rest of the world, it might have been content. But to William, it was 1997 all over again. The similarities were too striking to ignore. The Paris night sky, the gleam of headlights, the elegance turned eerie. And then, that blurred shot of Meghan's stiletto resting on the car seat. A mirror image, some said, of Diana's last photo, the one taken seconds before the crash. Coincidence or choreography? The internet argued, dissected, compared, frame by frame. The color tone, the lighting, the mood. Some called it an artistic tribute. Others called it blasphemy. But for William, there was no debate. The tunnel wasn't an aesthetic. It was a wound. And every flash, every whisper, every post that revisited it felt like reopening that scar. The same scar that defined his childhood and reshaped his entire adult life. Let's not forget, William and Harry were never just royal brothers. They were survivors of trauma. And trauma leaves marks that never fade. When William spoke years later about his mother, you could always feel the restraint, the pauses, the careful control. He had built a wall between public memory and private pain. But this, Meghan's video, shattered that wall. Because for the first time in years, the media wasn't replaying old footage of Diana. They were replaying new footage that echoed the past. A fresh reminder, a fresh sting. And the cruelest twist? It wasn't made by a tabloid. It was made by family. Royal insiders say William's first reaction was disbelief. "She can't be that oblivious," he reportedly said. "She knows what that place means." But disbelief quickly turned to anger. Because if it wasn't obliviousness, then it was something worse. Diana's memory had always been a silent war zone within the family. Everyone claimed to honor her. Everyone tried to own her image, from Harry's humanitarian causes to Charles's speeches about compassion. But William saw himself as the guardian, the one who carried her flame without exploiting it. And in that sense, Meghan's video wasn't just disrespectful, it was personal. To him, it was as if someone had walked into a church and turned the altar into a backdrop for a photo shoot. But let's pause for a moment and ask, did Meghan know? Did she realize the full gravity of where she was? Or was it just another scenic route back from Balenciaga's after-party? Paris is full of beauty, full of lights. To the casual traveler, the Pont de l'Alma is just a tunnel, no different from the hundreds of others winding beneath the city. But to the royal family, to Britain, it's a memorial, a tomb without stone. Right above the tunnel stands the Flame of Liberty monument, an unofficial tribute to Diana. Every year, visitors leave flowers there. Notes, candles, tears. Even now, decades later, her name is etched into the hearts of those who stop by. So when Meghan's video appeared online, the symbolism hit hard. Too hard. The timing made it worse. Just days before, royal fans had been marking another anniversary of Diana's death. Documentaries had aired. William had given a quiet speech about privacy, legacy, and motherhood. The grief was already close to the surface. And then, boom, a video from Paris. A car in motion. A tunnel. Some things don't need words to hurt. For the royal watchers who saw it, the anger was instinctive. Because it felt like watching history repeat itself, not in tragedy this time, but in tone-deaf glamour. The reactions grew brutal. Comment sections filled with emotion. Some posts were deleted for being too harsh. Others went viral, with people writing things like, "Diana gave her life escaping flashes, and Meghan chases them." That one line summed up the collective outrage. Diana died fleeing photographers. Meghan lives for them. Two women, two stories, colliding on the same road. And for William, that wasn't just irony. That was insult. Because he's built his adult life on protecting that legacy, on shielding his family from the very media machine that destroyed his mother. And now that legacy was being turned into aesthetic content, filmed and filtered for clicks. Even for those not loyal to the monarchy, the emotional weight of it all was undeniable. It was as if Diana's ghost had been dragged back into the spotlight, not through documentaries or memorials, but through an influencer lens. And that's when public sentiment shifted. What began as fascination turned to fury. Even fans who usually defended Meghan hesitated. One viral tweet summed it up. "This isn't about the monarchy. It's about humanity. Some places, you just don't turn into content." For once, the outrage wasn't divided by sides. It wasn't Team Meghan versus Team Palace. It was universal discomfort. And at the center of it all was William, the boy who lost his mother in that very tunnel. He had built his adulthood around restraint, composure, silence. But behind the palace walls, sources say, he broke that silence. He said what he'd been holding back for years. She turned Mum's tragedy into an aesthetic. Those words leaked a day later, and the world froze. You could feel the fracture in the air. This wasn't just another royal spat. It was a son's raw, unfiltered pain bleeding through the royal mask. And just like that, the stage was set. Because from that moment on, this wasn't just about Meghan Markle's video. It was about Diana's memory, William's grief, and a wound the monarchy had never truly healed. The tunnel wasn't just a tunnel anymore. It was a symbol of everything that divides the House of Windsor. But what happened next would make that divide deeper than ever. Because when William's private fury leaked to the press, the royal silence was shattered. And Meghan's team? They weren't about to stay quiet either. What came next turned a family tragedy into a global spectacle, and it all started with one leak no one saw coming. Same retention style, cinematic exposé tone, emotional contrasts, direct audience questions, and cliffhanger ending. Paris, the city of light, luxury, and reinvention. For most people, it's a dream. For Meghan Markle, it was a stage. After months of silence, whispers, and dwindling relevance in Hollywood, Meghan's sudden appearance at Paris Fashion Week wasn't just a fashion statement. It was a declaration of war. A carefully choreographed comeback, timed with precision, dressed in symbolism. Because if Los Angeles had turned its back on her, Paris, elegant, artistic, dramatic Paris, would embrace her. Or so she believed. The night she arrived, Paris felt electric. Balenciaga's runway was one of the most anticipated shows of the season. Stars like Nicole Kidman, Naomi Campbell, and Kim Kardashian filled the front row, the air thick with perfume, flashbulbs, and competition. But when Meghan stepped out of her car, every head turned. It wasn't just the clothes, though she wore them like armor. A sleek black silhouette, sharp shoulders, minimalist lines. The kind of look that whispered power, not pleaded for it. The photographers snapped furiously, shouting her name. The chorus of fame echoing off marble walls. For the first time in months, Meghan looked like she belonged again, back among the elite, basking in the approval of the same fashion world that had quietly sidelined her since the end of Suits and the royal exit drama. She smiled for the cameras, that perfect, trained smile, and every image screamed, "I'm back, and I don't need the crown to shine." But the timing, the location, and the symbolism of that night would turn that smile into a storm. Let's rewind for a moment. After leaving the royal family, Meghan had spent years crafting her image as a humanitarian, a mother, a feminist icon. But behind the branding was a deeper struggle, the fading of the public's fascination. Netflix deals, podcasts, red carpet moments that came and went. Each new venture brought attention, yes, but not adoration. And for someone who'd once commanded global obsession, that was a painful downgrade. Paris, then, was more than just an event. It was her re-entry into the conversation. A rebirth. The press release from Balenciaga had called her a friend of the house. But insiders whispered about something else, that Meghan's team had lobbied hard for the invitation, seeing it as the perfect opportunity to reposition her as both royal adjacent and fashion forward. And it worked, at least for a while. The photos went viral. Meghan stuns at Balenciaga. The Duchess of Style returns. Modern Grace Kelly vibes. Headlines poured in, and her fanbase rejoiced. But here's where the story gets complicated. Because in trying to rise again, Meghan didn't just chase the spotlight. She walked right into history's shadow. Hours after the show, Meghan's car glided through the streets of Paris. The night was quiet, soft, romantic, the kind of night that begs to be filmed. And she did. Phone in hand, she captured snippets of the city. The skyline, the lights, the hum of traffic, a soft piano track playing in the background. It looked effortless, aesthetic, even hauntingly beautiful. But then the camera panned, just slightly, and the Pont de l'Alma bridge came into view. She captioned it, simply, "Paris, you'll always have my heart." 12 words that changed everything. Because to most people, it was just another Instagram story, until they realized what that bridge led to. Within minutes, comments started flooding in. "Isn't that? She didn't just film that tunnel, did she? Unbelievable." And within hours, the video had gone viral. Not for its beauty, but for its haunting symbolism. The woman once compared to Diana had filmed herself passing through the exact spot where Diana's life had ended. The irony was cruel. The timing, uncanny. The backlash, immediate. But the real tragedy? It didn't have to be this way. Had Meghan chosen another route, another caption, even another moment to post, none of this would have happened. But in her relentless pursuit to be seen, she'd overlooked what she was standing on. Literally, the Pont de l'Alma isn't just concrete and headlights. It's memory. It's mourning. It's a symbol of everything that went wrong when fame, press, and privilege collided in one catastrophic moment. For William, that tunnel represents loss. For Harry, it's trauma. For the world, it's reverence. And for Meghan, in that instant, it became content. That's what ignited the fury. Because while she thought she was capturing ambience, the world saw appropriation, the turning of tragedy into aesthetic. The same woman who'd spoken passionately about breaking cycles of media intrusion was now accused of glamorizing the very scene where those flashes killed Diana. Public sentiment flipped overnight. Fashion critics who'd praised her now stayed silent. PR insiders whispered that even Balenciaga executives were caught off guard by the fallout. Meanwhile, her team scrambled. Some insiders claimed they urged her to delete the clip before it could spiral further. But by then, it was too late. Screenshots had spread. Reposts had multiplied. You can delete a video, but you can't delete a storm. The damage was done. And here's where the contradiction hit hardest. For years, Meghan had publicly positioned herself as Diana's emotional successor, a woman misunderstood by the establishment, vilified by the media, yet adored by the people. She'd told Oprah she felt Diana's presence guiding her. She'd worn outfits inspired by Diana's wardrobe. She'd spoken about being silenced the way Diana once was. But that connection, once powerful, now backfired. Because people saw the parallel not as poetic, but as provocative, the world began asking, was she honoring Diana or exploiting her? It was the question no one dared ask out loud during the early days of her marriage to Harry. But now, in the cold Parisian light, it echoed everywhere. And perhaps the most chilling part of it all, Meghan didn't flinch. No apology, no statement, no acknowledgement. Just a continuation of her curated feed, fashion shots, motivational quotes, stylish black and white posts. To her fans, that was resilience. To her critics, it was arrogance. And in the middle stood the man whose mother's death made that tunnel infamous, watching history twist itself again in the most painful way imaginable. Because while Meghan's social media accounts buzzed with likes and comments, back in London, William was seething in silence. Sources close to Kensington Palace would later reveal that he was visibly shaken by the clip. One aide reportedly said, "It was like seeing a ghost being mocked." But to Meghan, it was just another clip in a city full of memories she didn't live through. And here's where we hit the emotional paradox that defines this entire saga. Meghan's Paris moment was supposed to mark liberation, a woman breaking free from royal expectations, reclaiming her narrative, defining her image on her own terms. But instead, it reignited the very prison she'd tried to escape, the public's obsession with comparing her to Diana. The irony was cruel. The woman who once said, "I'm not Diana," was now being accused of crossing the one line Diana's sons could never forgive. And as the world debated her intent, Meghan's silence only deepened the divide. Because in an age where every apology feels scripted and every explanation strategic, saying nothing at all became its own statement. The tabloids called it defiance. Her supporters called it grace. William called it disrespect. And somewhere between those three interpretations, the truth got lost, as it always does when the monarchy and modern celebrity collide. But one thing was certain. Meghan's Paris comeback had backfired spectacularly. What should have been a triumphant return to glamour had become a moral firestorm. And the timing couldn't have been worse. Because just as the world was debating her intent, a source from inside the palace decided to speak. Someone close to William. Someone tired of royal restraint. And what they revealed, what they claimed William actually said behind closed doors, would make headlines across the globe. Because if Meghan's video had reopened Diana's wound, William's words were about to expose the scar beneath the crown. And when those words leaked, the world would see not the polished prince, not the calm future king, but the grieving son, the one who finally had enough. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Same structure, powerful hook, emotional build-up, and cliffhanger transition. It started like any other Instagram story. No press release, no pre-announcement. Just a few seconds of shaky footage, a soft Parisian glow, and a caption that seemed harmless enough. But those few seconds, that single swipe on a phone screen, would ignite a global firestorm. The clip went live at 10:47 p.m. Paris time. Within minutes, it was being reshared, screen-recorded, dissected, and debated. At first, people thought they were watching just another celebrity travel moment. But then, the comments started rolling in, fast, sharp, and emotional. Wait, is that the Pont de l'Alma tunnel? She didn't just drive there, did she? Someone tell me this is edited. What had begun as a casual social media post was now turning into an international scandal. The video was short, only 12 seconds long. But in those 12 seconds, it managed to do something the royal family had spent decades avoiding. It reopened the most painful chapter of their history. It began with a shot of the car window. Reflections of Paris streetlights flickered like camera flashes, a haunting coincidence, some said. Then came a faint instrumental melody, slow and melancholic, as if borrowed from a movie trailer. And finally, the shot that stopped millions cold, the car entering a tunnel. The exact tunnel. The camera lingered just long enough for viewers to recognize the curve of the concrete, the glow of the overhead lights, the unmistakable walls of the Pont de l'Alma. Then the video cut abruptly, fading into a blurred image of Meghan's stiletto heel propped on the seat beside her. A stylistic choice, perhaps, a moment of mood. But to millions watching, it was tone-deaf at best, grotesque at worst. The caption read, "Paris, you're eternal." 12 words. And a lifetime of grief. Within an hour, #DianaTunnel was trending across X, formerly Twitter. By midnight, #Meghan Markle disrespect was climbing global charts. And by morning, major tabloids from London to New York had picked it up. Fury over Meghan's Paris post. Royal fans say it reopens old wounds. Prince William deeply distressed by Meghan's video through tunnel where Diana died. Insensitive or ignorant. Meghan's Paris clip sparks outrage. The reaction was immediate, emotional, and divided. On one side were her supporters, those who claimed she was being unfairly targeted, that the video was a coincidence, a simple artistic expression. On the other were those who saw it as an unforgivable act, a calculated attempt to court attention through tragedy. But even among her most loyal defenders, the unease was palpable, because the symbolism was impossible to ignore. The world had watched Diana's life end in that very tunnel, a woman hounded by photographers, pursued by flashbulbs, dying as the press chased her for one last shot. And now, nearly 30 years later, the wife of Diana's youngest son was driving through that same tunnel, filming it, posting it, smiling behind the lens. You can't script irony that cruel. Royal biographers called it the most chilling full-circle moment in modern royal history. Psychologists called it a trauma trigger for an entire generation. Social media called it unforgivable. But inside Kensington Palace, the reaction wasn't just emotional, it was volcanic. Because for Prince William, this wasn't public controversy. This was private pain turned into public spectacle. And when he saw that video, sources say, something in him broke. To understand why, you have to remember, William's life has been defined by silence. He rarely comments. He rarely reacts. When scandals swirl, he retreats. When the media speculates, he remains stoic. But this time, that discipline cracked. An insider later told The Telegraph, he watched it once, then again, and then he turned it off and said, "She made it look beautiful." That sentence carried more weight than 1,000 press statements. Because beauty, in this case, was the problem. Diana's death wasn't beautiful. It was horrific. And to frame that location in aesthetic lighting, with music, with luxury, with glamour, was, to William, a betrayal of everything his mother stood for. Because to him, the Pont de l'Alma wasn't a place. It was a scar. And when he saw it turned into content by someone who had once called herself the woman Diana would be proud of, it was like salt on that scar. But what about Harry? Interestingly, in those first few hours, the silence wasn't just from Meghan. It was from Harry too. No denial. No context. No attempt to explain. Just quiet. And that silence became deafening. Because to the public, it suggested something deeper. Maybe even division. Had Harry approved the post? Did he know where she was filming? Or was this yet another solo move by Meghan? A PR decision made without the palace's restraint or Harry's caution? Nobody knew. And that uncertainty only fueled the fire. Within 24 hours, royal experts filled the airwaves. She's tone-deaf. She's provoking them intentionally. She's reliving Diana's path to claim emotional sympathy. But the truth was murkier, because Meghan had always been strategic. Every photo, every outfit, every public appearance served a narrative. And whether she meant to or not, this video had just written the most controversial chapter yet. Because even if she didn't mean disrespect, she had chosen the one place on earth where symbolism was unavoidable. And now, every frame was being pulled apart, zoomed in, paused, replayed. Commentators noted how her reflection flickered in the car window, echoing old paparazzi shots of Diana in similar light. Some claimed it couldn't be coincidence. Others argued it had to be, that no one could possibly be so careless. But intent didn't matter anymore. Impact did. By the second day, major networks were running the story in full segments. CNN, BBC, Sky News. Each headline asked the same question. How could she not know? Even fashion outlets that had celebrated her Balenciaga appearance, Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, Elle, went silent, quietly burying her name from the post-show coverage. Balenciaga, in particular, found itself in an awkward position. The brand, already controversial for past PR disasters, had courted Meghan for her visibility. But suddenly, her visibility had become toxic. One insider told WWD there were meetings that night. Everyone knew it was bad optics. And in the royal world, optics are everything. Behind palace doors, William's staff went into damage control. Though no official statement was planned, they braced for questions. Would he address it? Would he confront Harry privately? Would he let the outrage die down naturally? But the storm didn't die down. It grew. By the third day, the clip had hit 50 million views across reposts and reuploads. Hashtags were multiplying. Hashtag Diana deserves better. Hashtag William was right. Hashtag tunnel of shame. You could feel the shift. The public mood had turned from fascination to fury. Even Americans, who once viewed Meghan as the wronged outsider, began to express discomfort. She knows what she's doing, one viral post read. Everything she films has purpose. This wasn't random. This was a choice. And yet, amid all that noise, Meghan stayed silent. Some PR experts speculated that she was waiting for it to blow over. Others suggested she didn't want to legitimize the backlash with a response. But silence, in moments like this, doesn't calm storms, it feeds them. And William's silence, equally heavy, equally deliberate, was even more powerful. Because for him, this wasn't a tabloid squabble. This was sacred. The Pont de l'Alma wasn't just the site of his mother's death. It was the reason he became the man he is, guarded, disciplined, cautious. It was the night he learned what fame costs. And now, watching his sister-in-law turn that tragedy into a backdrop, all those lessons came rushing back. He had seen how fame destroyed innocence. He had seen how image consumed truth. And he had sworn it would never happen again. Not on his watch, not under his reign. But now, it was happening again. Only this time, the cameras were in the hands of someone who once promised to be different. There's something almost poetic about how history repeats itself, not as tragedy, but as performance. Diana ran from the flashes. Meghan captured them. Diana died, trying to escape the world's gaze. Meghan thrived by inviting it back in. And that's the contrast that broke the internet. Not the video itself, but what it represented. Two women, two eras, two meanings of fame colliding in one Paris tunnel. It was as if the ghosts of the past were whispering, "Haven't we learned anything?" But as the world argued, and the headlines multiplied, something new began to stir behind the scenes. Whispers that Prince William's reaction wasn't just private fury anymore. Someone inside the palace had heard his words. Someone who decided the world deserved to hear them too. And what leaked next, what the media would soon publish as William's private fury, would change everything. Because for the first time, the future king wouldn't be silent. He would be human. And when his words hit the headlines, the storm would turn into a hurricane. But what came next would make the internet's outrage look like a warm-up. Because this wasn't just about a video anymore. It was about loyalty, grief, and a family already hanging by a thread. They said he never raises his voice. That when Prince William gets angry, it's not in shouts or slammed doors, it's in silence. But that night, silence wasn't enough. When the video reached him, the world hadn't even finished reacting yet. The clip was still circulating across X, TikTok, and YouTube, the algorithm feeding outrage like oxygen to a fire. But for William, it wasn't trending content. It was personal. He sat in his private office at Kensington Palace, the phone screen glowing in his hand. The same tunnel, the same curve, the same shadows he'd seen only in nightmares. And the sound, that faint, cinematic piano melody in Meghan's video, hit him like a ghost humming through the years. For a long moment, he said nothing, just stared. Then, according to one royal aide, he muttered under his breath. She made it look beautiful. 3 words. Quiet, but lethal. To those who know him, those words said everything. Because beauty, in this context, was betrayal. Diana's death had been many things, tragic, shocking, senseless, but it had never been beautiful. It was chaos and carnage, sirens and screams. To turn that location into a filter-friendly aesthetic wasn't just tasteless. It was sacrilege. And for William, whose entire adult life had been built around preserving his mother's dignity, that realization cut deep. He closed the video, set the phone down, and for a moment, No one dared to move. One aide said the tension was so thick, you could feel the air leave the room. Then, quietly but firmly, he said, "She turned Mum's tragedy into an aesthetic." That was the sentence that would soon leak, the one headline that would make its way from palace corridors to newspaper front pages. But inside the palace, that moment wasn't gossip. It was grief. Because in that instant, Prince William wasn't the Duke of Cambridge or the future King of England. He was a son watching his mother's death replayed through the lens of someone who, once upon a time, had claimed to understand her pain. To understand him, his staff knew better than to speak, but one of them, reportedly, whispered softly, "Sir, maybe it wasn't intentional." William turned sharply, his voice low. "She knows where that tunnel is. Everyone knows where that tunnel is." It wasn't rage in his tone, it was something colder, the kind of disappointment that's worse than anger. For years, he tried to stay above the noise. He'd never publicly lashed out at Meghan and Harry, no matter what accusations they'd thrown at him, of being trapped, cold, out of touch. But this was different. This wasn't about politics or titles. It was about her. The mother who'd shielded him from flashes and headlines, who'd kissed him goodnight with the same hands that signed divorce papers. The mother who, on the night of August 31st, 1997, had been chased by the same kind of attention Meghan was now inviting. And in that cruel twist of history, William saw a line that could never be crossed. Sources later described his demeanor that night as haunted. He didn't sleep. He didn't speak to Kate immediately, not until the next morning, over tea, when he quietly slid the phone across the table and said, "You need to see this." Kate watched in silence. Her face, usually unreadable, fell. She closed her eyes, then whispered, "Oh, Will," because she knew. She'd lived through the years of his quiet pain. She'd seen how Diana's name was never spoken casually in their home, not out of avoidance, but reverence. For them, Diana wasn't a myth or a brand. She was a mother-in-law, a grandmother their children would never meet. And to see her death site turn into digital art, that was unthinkable. The palace machine, however, doesn't run on emotion. It runs on control. And within hours, aides were already discussing how to manage the fallout. "Should we issue a statement?" one asked. "No," William said sharply. "No statements. She wants a reaction. She won't get one." But even silence speaks when the whole world is watching. And word began to spread, quietly at first, through whispers among the staff, then louder, as one of those whispers made its way to a tabloid contact. The story broke 2 days later. Prince William, appalled by Meghan's Paris video, calls it a mockery of Diana's legacy. It hit the front page of the Daily Mail first, then the Sun, then the Telegraph. Every outlet ran with the quote, "She turned Mum's tragedy into an aesthetic." The line was devastatingly poetic, too raw to be scripted, too personal to be fabricated. And just like that, William's fury went public. The world reacted instantly. Some praised him for standing up for Diana's legacy. Others accused the palace of leaking private emotion for sympathy. But behind the noise, one thing was undeniable. The balance of power in the royal narrative had shifted. For the first time in years, Meghan wasn't the victim. She was the villain. Even her allies in Hollywood fell silent. There were no celebrity defenses, no hashtags of support. The outrage was too widespread, too emotional. You can argue with politics, you can't argue with grief. Meanwhile, William remained silent. No comment, no follow-up. Because the truth didn't need amplification, it had already spoken for itself. Insiders claimed that King Charles reached out to his son after reading the headlines. "Let it go," he allegedly said. "You can't control what she does." But William's reply was simple. "No, but I can control what I stand for." Those words echoed through the palace halls. Because they weren't just about Meghan, they were about the monarchy itself. For decades, the institution had been accused of exploiting Diana in its own way, using her image for nostalgia, her memory for redemption. But William's stance was clear. Her legacy wasn't currency. It was sacred, and that's why this moment was so powerful. It wasn't a PR move. It wasn't politics. It was the raw emotion of a man who'd finally said what he'd held in for years. He wasn't angry because of optics. He was angry because of empathy, because he'd seen what fame did to his mother, and now he was watching history flirt with the same mistake. In private, Kate reportedly comforted him with a single sentence. "Your mother would be proud you spoke up." It didn't calm him, not really. But it anchored him. Because for William, Diana's pride is the one legacy that matters. And yet, as his fury simmered into grief, a new problem emerged: the leak itself. Who told the press? The palace doesn't confirm private conversations, which meant someone, somewhere in his inner circle, had broken that code. Some said it was intentional, an orchestrated leak to make his feelings known without breaking protocol. Others said it was accidental, a careless aide repeating his words in the wrong ear. But regardless of how it happened, the effect was nuclear. Meghan's team went into panic mode. Lawyers were reportedly contacted, PR consultants brought in, crisis managers briefed. But Meghan herself stayed quiet. Not a single post, not a single statement, just silence. And that silence made things worse. Because the world expected an apology, or at least an acknowledgement. Something, anything, to show remorse. Instead, her refusal to respond was read as arrogance. For William, it was confirmation of what he already believed, that she didn't care, that she had never cared. In his eyes, this wasn't misunderstanding, it was manipulation. The longer Meghan stayed silent, the angrier the world became. Comment sections turned into memorial walls. People shared old photos of Diana with captions like, "She deserved better." Flowers appeared again at the Flame of Liberty Monument in Paris, the same spot where tourists now left notes reading, "We still remember you, Diana." Even the press, usually divided, united for once. British, French, American, all carrying variations of the same headline. The one line Prince William couldn't forgive. And beneath those headlines, a new question began to form. Would Harry say anything? Because his silence was becoming as loud as hers. For the first time, the brothers weren't just estranged. They were standing on opposite sides of their mother's memory. William defending it, Harry avoiding it. That dynamic, raw, emotional, deeply human, fascinated the public. People weren't just watching a royal feud anymore. They were watching a family unravel over grief that had never truly healed. And somewhere in Montecito, sources claimed, Meghan began to feel the weight of it. The isolation, the silence, the turning tide. But before she could even decide how to respond, someone else entered the story, someone she hadn't expected. Because if William's fury had shaken the palace, another royal's quiet words would ignite it all over again. A woman known for her bluntness, for her discipline, for her loyalty to the crown, and her deep love for Diana, Princess Anne. And what she said next would strike a chord so deep, it would echo through every royal hall in Britain. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It began as a whisper, a hushed murmur inside Kensington Palace that someone close to William, had spoken out of turn. At first, no one believed it. Leaks happen in royal life. Yes, but never this raw, never this personal. William's private words weren't supposed to leave those walls. They were said in grief, not calculation. In trust, not strategy. But by dawn, they were headlines. Prince William appalled by Meghan's video, calls it a disgrace to his mother's memory. One sentence, and the monarchy trembled. The world woke up to his fury splashed across front pages. British breakfast shows cut to royal correspondents live outside Kensington Palace. Commentators described the leak as unprecedented, explosive, and a line in the sand. It was no longer speculation, it was war. The irony? William hadn't even said it for the world to hear. It was an emotional reaction, private, pained, spontaneous. But someone close enough to witness it had carried it beyond the palace gates. The question was, who? Theories spread faster than facts. Some claimed it was a junior aide, a young staffer overwhelmed by the intensity of the moment, confiding in the wrong friend. Others whispered that the leak wasn't accidental at all, that the palace allowed it, quietly sanctioning it as a way to defend Diana's memory without issuing a formal statement. After all, how else could the royal family express outrage without breaking their code of silence? Never complain, never explain. That's been the Windsor way for generations. But this time, the pain was too personal, the insult too sharp. A leak gave them deniability, a way to speak without speaking. And in a single day, that leak achieved what no official statement ever could. It made the world stop scrolling. Because it wasn't just a source. It was a sun. The public reaction was immediate, and electric. Social media lit up again, but this time, not against William. Against Meghan. Hashtag I stand with William trended in the UK within hours. Old footage of Diana resurfaced across TikTok, paired with captions like, "Protect her memory." Videos of William and Harry as boys walking behind their mother's coffin flooded timelines. Millions of views, millions of tears. Even those who'd previously been sympathetic to Meghan felt an uncomfortable tug of empathy for the prince. Because it wasn't about monarchy anymore. It was about motherhood, grief, and respect. You could feel it in the tone of the public conversation. No one was debating politics. They were defending emotion. "I'm not royalist," one tweet read. "But if someone filmed through the place my mum died and posted it like art, I'd lose it too." That single sentiment summed up the moment. William wasn't the prince anymore. He was every grieving child watching the world forget that death deserves dignity. And yet, inside the palace, the atmosphere wasn't triumphant. It was tense. Because leaks, even sympathetic ones, are dangerous things. Once you open that door, you can't close it. Every phone call between aides became a quiet interrogation. Every glance a silent accusation. Who betrayed the confidence? Who lit the fuse? William's private secretary reportedly launched an internal inquiry. Informal, of course, to maintain discretion. But everyone knew what was happening. Word had gotten out, and the palace wanted to know how. The results never reached the public. They never do. But whispers claimed the leak wasn't entirely accidental. Someone close to the communications office had approved the quote's release under the guise of setting the record straight. If that's true, it would mean the palace, for once, had fought fire with fire. And it worked. Because for the first time in years, public opinion wasn't divided. It was unified around William. Front pages ran side-by-side photos of him and Diana. He's his mother's son, defending her dignity even now. It was powerful, poetic, painful. Meanwhile, across the ocean, the mood in Montecito was panic. Meghan's team scrambled to contain the fallout. Lawyers were looped in, PR strategists briefed, emails flew between Los Angeles and London. The question dominating every crisis call: do we respond? But that question had no easy answer. Because if Meghan responded, she risked looking defensive, or worse, guilty. If she stayed silent, she looked heartless. Silence can be strength. But in this storm, it looked like indifference. One insider told People magazine, "She's devastated. She feels misunderstood." The video wasn't meant to upset anyone. But that anonymous defense only fueled the fire. If it wasn't meant to upset anyone, royal watchers asked, then why was it filmed at all? The backlash didn't just hurt her image, it bled into her brand. Sponsorships, collaborations, and partnerships began quietly stalling. Balenciaga, already facing its own PR controversies, allegedly distanced itself. Editors who once featured her in glossy spreads now declined to comment. Because in the court of public opinion, timing is everything, and Meghan's couldn't have been worse. The world wasn't just angry, it was emotional. Every time the video replayed, it triggered collective memory. Flashing back to August 1997, to that night of loss that transcended generations. People weren't reacting to Meghan's action alone. They were reacting to what it reminded them of. Grief is contagious that way. And for William, that grief was suddenly public again, louder than ever. Reports claimed he'd refused to discuss the matter further, even as palace officials urged him to issue a clarification, a line to cool the headlines. He said no. "I said what I said," he reportedly told a friend. "I'm done explaining." It was rare defiance from the man who'd been groomed his whole life to keep the peace. But it also humanized him. For years, critics painted William as stiff, cold, emotionless, the institutional brother compared to Harry's warmth. But in this moment, the world saw the truth. He wasn't cold. He was wounded. Even Harry's allies and the press struggled to defend Meghan. The silence from the Sussex camp became its own statement, and it wasn't helping. Because now, people weren't just asking, "Why did she film that?" They were asking, "Why hasn't Harry said anything?" Every hour that passed without comment widened the rift between the brothers in the public eye. It painted a picture, one brother standing for respect, the other lost in silence. But inside the palace, the emotional toll was deeper than headlines. William wasn't just fighting a PR storm, he was reliving a trauma. Those who saw him said he became quiet, withdrawn. The fury that had fueled him at first turned into sorrow. Late nights pacing through Kensington's hallways, staring at old photos of Diana. It wasn't about the video anymore. It was about what it symbolized. That no matter how much time passed, no matter how many crowns were polished, grief still had power. Kate, ever his anchor, reportedly urged him to focus on their children, to take George and Charlotte to school himself that week, to stay grounded. And he did. But every reporter who photographed him that morning wrote the same thing. His eyes looked tired. Meanwhile, royal courtiers tried to manage the growing crisis. Meetings were held. PR advisors suggested refocusing public attention, perhaps through an event honoring Diana's charities or a joint statement from the family. But the king had his own opinion. Charles, ever pragmatic, wanted calm. He reportedly told aides, "This mustn't turn into a circus. Let it fade." But how could it fade when the wound was so fresh? When even ordinary citizens were lighting candles again at Diana's memorial site in Paris. The video had turned grief into movement. It had reignited emotions Britain hadn't felt since the funeral itself. And for once, the monarchy couldn't hide behind protocol, because this wasn't about policy. It was about pain. Yet, in the middle of all that chaos, another voice emerged, quieter, older, sharper. Princess Anne. At a public engagement days later, she was asked about the public's reaction to recent events in Paris. She smiled faintly, that tight, knowing smile she always gives when she's about to deliver a dagger wrapped in courtesy. Then she said, "Some things are sacred, and some people forget that." 8 words. Calm, controlled, but devastating. The clip of her remarks spread almost as fast as Meghan's video had. It was shared across social media with captions like, "and said what everyone was thinking." The public adored her bluntness. The palace, however, went silent again because they knew what it meant and had spoken for them. It was a royal rebuke, not from the throne, but from the heart. The kind that doesn't need a press release because it speaks louder in restraint. And Meghan? She'd just been publicly scolded by the one royal who never misses her mark. But what came next would push things to an entirely new level, because Princess Anne's words were about to trigger a response no one expected. A response not from Meghan, not from Harry, but from the king himself. And his message would blur the line between compassion and condemnation, leaving the world wondering where the crown truly stood. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It happened quietly. No press conference, no spokesperson, no dramatic music, just a single post. Meghan Markle broke her silence not with an apology, not with an explanation, but with a photo. It appeared on her personal Instagram account at 6:13 p.m. California time. No caption, no context, just an image of her standing in front of a window, the soft Paris light spilling across her face. The same light, people realized, from the same trip. Within minutes, it had 500,000 likes. Within an hour, the comment section was chaos. Finally, where's your apology? Still making it about yourself. But before the world could finish refreshing the page, a second post appeared. This one had words. A simple white background. Black serif font. "When we remember, we honor." My intention was never to cause pain, only reflection. Paris has a place in my heart, as it does in many others who believe in beauty after loss. That was it. No mention of Diana. No mention of William. No direct reference to the video or the tunnel. Just reflection. Just beauty after loss. But it was enough to reignite the fire. The reactions split the internet in half. To her supporters, it was poetic, dignified, even spiritual. "She's speaking from compassion," they said. "She's reminding us that tragedy and beauty can coexist." But to her critics, to the royalists, to the mourning generation who remembered Diana's funeral, to those who had watched William's face as a 15-year-old boy walking behind that coffin, it was salt in the wound. "How dare she talk about beauty?" One furious user wrote. "There's nothing beautiful about that tunnel." Another comment read, "She's not sorry. She's just sorry she got caught." And beneath that post, someone wrote simply, "When we remember, we honor. Then remember to be silent." Within hours, the backlash had snowballed again. Hashtags flooded the internet. Hashtag apologize to William. Hashtag Diana deserved better. Hashtag not art, just arrogance. Royal correspondents called it a masterclass in tone-deaf PR. Crisis managers privately called it a disaster dressed as poetry. Even the Times ran a headline that stung like a knife. Reflection or deflection? Meghan's non-apology divides the public once again. And yet, in that storm, Meghan stayed still. No follow-up post. No statement. No interviews. Silence. Again, the silence of someone who believed the message spoke for itself. But behind that silence, the damage was growing. Inside Kensington Palace, William reportedly saw the post and turned away mid-sentence. She made it about herself, he told an aide flatly. Again, that night, a source claimed, he walked alone through the palace gardens, phone in hand, scrolling through reactions, reading comments from ordinary people who'd lost mothers, wives, sisters. Every line about grief hit home. Every mention of Diana was a knife. And for the first time, the public saw him not just as the future king, but as the grieving son who could never escape that night. Kate, ever composed, told a close friend, he feels betrayed all over again. He's not angry anymore, he's hurt. That distinction mattered. Anger fades. Hurt lingers. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Meghan's team watched the chaos unfold in real time. Inside her Montecito mansion, PR advisors debated their next move. Some argued for a formal statement, something human, emotional, apologetic. Others insisted the backlash would blow over if she stayed calm. She's not a villain, one advisor said. We can reframe this as misunderstanding. But Meghan wasn't just strategizing. She was stewing. Friends later claimed she felt blindsided. That she didn't expect William's reaction to be so visceral or the world's anger to be so intense. In her mind, she'd created something artistic, a reflection of healing, of survival, of light in the darkness.